Story 1. I was 5 years old when my kindergarten teacher taught us about emergency services. One weekend, my parents slept in late and got grumpy if I woke them up. I wanted to make cookies, so I called emergency services to ask for help because I wasn't allowed to use the stove without an adult. I did not get to make cookies with the police officer. Instead, my very annoyed parents and a police officer who was trying not to laugh lectured me about how emergency services should only be used in emergencies. Using adult supervision to make cookies was not an emergency. They told me that next time, I should either wait for my parents to wake up or call my grandparents. Story 2. I heard a woman calling for help from the fraternity house across the street. 2 police officers showed up at my door, asking what I heard. Then we heard the woman calling for help again. They ran across the street, calling for backup. A few minutes later, they had all the fraternity members and some of their girlfriends on the front lawn, yelling at them and really reading them the riot act. A senior fraternity member had taken a girl, actually his girlfriend who was in on it, to his room and pretended to assault her while she screamed for help. They were testing their new pledge's loyalty to the fraternity. Interfering with the senior members' fun would have been a failure. Story 3. Dad was drunk and holding us hostage with a shotgun. The worst part is that he completely blamed me for his arrest and probation. My mom did the same. They wonder why I cut contact when I moved out. Story 4. I thought I was having a heart attack, but it turned out to be a wild side effect from one of the medications I was taking. I was told it was just a really intense panic attack. My heart rate suddenly shot up while I was in the shower, and my chest hurt so much it scared me. Couldn't catch my breath. The paramedics said my heart rate was around 140 beats per minute. Thanks, Wellbutrin. Story 5. I found a homeless man collapsed in the street gutter. He was completely unresponsive. I stayed until emergency medical services arrived, but the last thing I saw before I left was the paramedics grabbing the defibrillator. I have no idea if he survived. Story 6. I was training my older son how to use the emergency phone number. I called the non-emergency dispatch ahead of time and asked if I could have him call the emergency number right away, so that he would know what to expect to do if he ever had to call them. They were very nice, and we were living in a rural area. I have never actually had to call the emergency number for a real emergency. Story 7. A person was parked in their car at night, in a parking lot behind my house. They were tapping out "Save Our Souls" in Morse code using their car horn. I still do not know the reason, but because I could see them from my window, I watched the whole scene, including the arrival of the police. Story 8. I was around 10 or 11 years old, standing out front of my house just enjoying the quiet. A drunk couple was trying to ride home late one night. The man went over the handlebars and hit the pavement face first. I ran over. He was really hurt but was trying to get up to leave. I finally got him to stop trying to leave and got towels to try to stop the bleeding. It was before cell phones, so I had to run back inside and make the call. My friend shattered his jaw, lost most of his teeth, and split his face open. I mainly remember the woman he was with being upset that they were going to get arrested for being drunk. She did not seem to care at all that a literal child was holding her partner's face together. Story 9. My mom was choking my sister, saying that she should have had an abortion. Story 10. Found a man face down on the pavement outside my house who would not respond. Luckily, I lived literally across the road from the hospital, so the ambulance arrived in 2 minutes. As soon as the paramedics saw him, they recognized him by name and realized he was just a homeless man who had fallen asleep. Story 11. Australian here, so it was 000. But I was a dumb kid and heard my parents complaining about money. I had been told to call 000 if I ever needed help. So I called and asked for money. Story 12. My friend broke her ankle playing basketball. I was about 15 and did my best to stay calm, but seeing a bone about to come through the skin really rattled me. Joke's on me, I became an army medic. Bones don't bother me anymore. Story 13. My grandmother was having a stroke. She had already had one previously, so she knew what was happening. My mother, sister, and I were helping her when it happened. Story 14. I used to live in a troubled neighborhood, alone, And most of the time I was only there to sleep because I stayed at my then girlfriend's house. One time I woke up to find the main door slightly open and discovered they had stolen my new liquid crystal display television. The next day, when I was coming home from the gym, I noticed many patrol cars and a lot of my belongings on the hood of a patrol car. The thief had come back for what he couldn't take the day before. Suffice to say, I started having sleep problems and insomnia. I began sleeping with one of those strobe flashlights and a large knife under my bed. One day, about an hour after falling asleep, I heard noises at the window and saw a man prying it open. I took my flashlight and knife and went downstairs. I called emergency services and also alerted the neighbors, who had a Rottweiler dog. The window had protective bars. By the time the police arrived, the thief was gone. That was the last straw, and I moved from there. Story 15. Funny story, my little brother, who was maybe 6 at the time, really liked that old show Rescue 911 with William Shatner. One time after the show was over, he called 911 to tell them it was a really good episode and that he was happy they do a good job. Then he hung up. They called back, and Mom was not happy about that because they have to call back if they think it was a prank call or something. Story 16:1. Watched a car pull out from the interstate median, lose control, and broadside a semi-truck. Other drivers also reported it. Followed a car weaving in our lane and periodically driving on the side of the interstate. Definitely an impaired driver. Emergency services asked me if I could get close enough to read the license plate, and I said no. Story 17. My fiancé was having a seizure. He had never had one before, with no family history, completely out of the blue. I have many nightmares about needing to call emergency services and having trouble dialing. Fortunately, it was not actually that hard, but I did get his age and our apartment number wrong because I was so frazzled. Story 18. I was 16. I got up one morning to find my grandmother had passed away. My parents were both at work. She was fine when they left but had suffered a severe stroke between their leaving and my sister and I getting up. I called an ambulance and then had to call my parents and break the news to them. I also had to calm my hysterical younger sister. Over 20 years later, I still have residual trauma from that experience. Story 19. This will be a more unusual answer. I worked in telecommunications installing business phone systems. Anytime we were installing new services or moving the same, we were required to dial emergency services to verify the name and address attached to the calling line. I have dialed emergency services thousands of times, hundreds for one customer alone. I got on a first-name basis with the local operators and even delivered them treats and coffee for helping with that one customer. At a guess, my first emergency services call would have been in the late 1980s. Story 20. I was out with a friend celebrating my birthday. We lived close to the bar we were at and did not want to drive since we had both been drinking, so we walked home. While we were walking, another girl from the bar decided to get in her car and drive home while intoxicated. While she was scrolling on Instagram, she forgot that she was driving and swerved onto the shoulder, hitting my friend and killing her instantly. That was the first time I ever had to call emergency services. Story 21. I used to live 5 minutes from my parents' house. My dad was working a night shift. My phone rang at 1:30 a.m., showing my parents' number. I sleepily answered it to hear my mom's whispered voice say, "Help me," and then the phone dropped. I raced over to find her in bed, breathing shallowly but unconscious, so I called emergency services. I couldn't believe how fast the local firefighters arrived before the ambulance. Mind-blowingly fast. Those guys are amazing. They gave her oxygen and helped her become somewhat awake, checked all her vitals, and then she was off to the hospital in an ambulance. It turned out to be her arthritis causing swelling in the sac around her heart, leading to heart attack-type pain in her chest. It was a scary night. That was about 25 years ago, and she's still with us. Arthritis is nasty. I'll never forget her voice that night. I have no idea why she didn't call emergency services herself. Maybe she just hit a speed dial button or something. She doesn't remember. Story 22. My mom woke me up at 3 a.m. saying our house was on fire. She told me to call emergency services, but by the time she came to my room to wake me, She could have finished the call. Story 23. I think the first time was when my husband had sepsis. That incident landed him in the intensive care unit for a few days. Story 24. My mom had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. We cared for her at home but could not continue. She died 2 months later in the hospital. I was 20 years old. Story 25. A man sold a fake gold ring along the highway, claiming it was a broken car. He said he would give his ring for repairs or something unusual. Fortunately, I can tell real gold from fake well above average. Story 26. A fire broke out in my neighbor's house, but in Mexico, emergency services do not respond when dialing 911. Therefore, we put out the fire together with all the neighbors. Story 27. A couple was fighting in the neighboring apartment. I heard the man yelling about how he was going to beat her after he had already hit the wall so hard that pictures fell off my wall inside my apartment. Story 28. When I was 20, my son's father was violently losing control while drunk because I called the police non-emergency number on his father for possessing child pornography earlier that day. Story 29. I hit a deer and did not know what town I was in to call local authorities. They connected me to the game warden who came out and put the animal down. Story 30. The first time I was involved in an emergency call was probably when my dad accidentally called emergency services while we were hiking. I still don't understand how this could happen, but it's typical with my dad. They called back and he convinced them everything was okay. But it must have seemed very odd that we were in the woods when this happened. The first and only time that I have called emergency services was when I was a volunteer election worker, and an older lady leaned on the cheap voting booth and took the whole thing down. She didn't seem hurt but was shaken, and emergency medical services decided to take her. She was able to cast her vote while being stretchered out. Story 31. My late grandmother had a severe stroke and had to call for an ambulance. She survived but developed vascular dementia. Story 32. My sister was visiting and she was feeling sick, vomiting, and collapsing. I called emergency services, crying, "I am glad my ex was there." Story 33. I was previously a paramedic, so I do not know that I had ever called emergency services before this year. My mother had low blood sugar from too much insulin and was unconscious. I was able to recognize the problem, but I could not treat it. Story 34. Our house phone was between the couch cushions. I was in 3rd grade or something like that. I was really scared when police officers showed up at my house. Story 35. The place where I work requires our office to conduct a yearly test to ensure we can connect to dispatch. So far, knocking on wood, that has been the only reason. Story 36. I got ready to leave for work at night, and this man was drunk and passed out next to his car. I only saw him when I backed out, and my light shone on him. I thought I had just run someone over who was working on their car. As I walked up and tried calling out to him, he wasn't moving and didn't look like he was breathing. I thought he might be dead. I looked to see if he was hurt or shot, but I didn't see any evidence. I looked in the car and saw an unopened beer can. I called emergency services, and they came and checked on him. He got up, almost got into a fight with the officers, and at one point started walking toward me aggressively. Story 37. I was driving down a rural highway and saw small fires burning on the right shoulder. I caught up with a man pulling a trailer with the right tire on fire. He was throwing out chunks of burning rubber. I guessed the bearings had overheated. I called emergency services, and the man pulled over after I kept flashing my lights. Story 38. Burglary. This could have been a non-emergency call, but I was calling because I discovered the house torn up and was looking for my cats. During the search, I realized no one was there. The cats were okay, although one was terrified and had hidden under my bed. Story 39. To report a brush fire that had just started on the interstate. Apparently, I was not the first one to call because they said, "Yes, we know." Story 40. Apartment building neighbors were smoking on the porch where there were gaps in the concrete and many dry dead leaves. Half an hour later, I came down to do laundry and the area under the porch and against an apartment wall was completely on fire. Story 41. Accident at an intersection. A reckless driver ran the red light and caused an elderly woman who was about to turn right to go off the road into the ditch. Thankfully, no one was injured. Story 42. I didn't call them, but a methamphetamine user came into the pizza shop and wanted to sleep in the back. The only people there were me, 17, my best friend, 15, and our driver, about 22 to 24, but she was on a delivery for most of it. I tried to bribe him out, saying, "Sorry, you can't sleep in the back, but you can have this 2-liter soda for free." I was panicking and remembered my boss saying methamphetamine users love sugar. The man started getting agitated, going through his pockets, and I thought, yes, one of us is getting stabbed tonight. I put myself between him and my best friend. The driver came back. The man was still insisting he sleep in the back and was drooling everywhere. She immediately went into the office and called emergency services. The man started telling me a number I couldn't understand, so I said, "Yeah, for sure," and used the opportunity to text our boss. "Person under the influence in the store. Driver is calling emergency services. Don't call, just come." The boss showed up in 5 minutes. Took the police about half an hour to arrive. When they did, they looked at me and said, "Well, what do you want us to do?" We all just replied, "I don't know. Do your job. Get this person out of here." Story 43. A few years before my city had emergency services, there were separate phone numbers for the police department, fire department, and ambulance service. I was robbed at gunpoint while dropping a business deposit in the bank's after-hours Dropbox. Story 44. First time. A lady was wandering down the road, stopping cars and hitting their windows. Second time. A friend had a seizure during a hurricane. We managed to contact emergency medical services before they evacuated. The friend went to the hospital and walked home during the worst part of the storm. That was rough. Story 45. Dropping a friend off at work, we drove past a man having a fit on the pavement. My friend was a professional lifeguard, and I was a qualified first aider, so I dialed emergency services. We worked together to help him until the ambulance arrived. It was the only time I have ever had to use my training for an actual incident. I was shaking from adrenaline afterward, but glad we came across him and could help until the professionals arrived. Story 46. I was a helper at a carnival and we found a man on the ground who was unresponsive because he was too intoxicated to communicate. Story 47. My father tried to strangle me because I refused to move out at 18 due to the fact that I had absolutely no life skills and would have likely ended up very homeless. I do not talk to him anymore. Story 48. When I was a child, I got lost while out for a walk visiting a family friend in Fresno. A kind police officer took me back to the friend's house. Sometime later, I was back in my small town in the Sierra Nevada, waiting at the community hall for my parents to pick me up from dance class. I got tired of waiting, so I called the emergency services number to get a ride home from the police. I'm pretty sure the operator realized I was just a naive child and pretended not to take it seriously until I got frustrated and hung up. My parents picked me up, I told them what I did, and they were not happy. Story 49. I found a deceased man in his truck, which was running and in gear. He had died with his foot wedged on the brake. Right after I called, the truck suddenly started moving again. It ran up the curb slowly and into a bus shelter. Other than the driver, nobody was hurt. Story 50. It was a mistake. I was working in a drugstore and, in order to dial out, I had to press 9, then the phone number. I hung up immediately, not thinking. The police came quickly and told me that if it happened again, I should stay on the phone and inform the operator of my mistake. Story 51. Last Tuesday, I had to call emergency services for the first time because a tree fell on an electric pole and caught on fire. Thankfully, no wildfire started. Story 52. I bought an inexpensive car that the previous owner had done a lot of poor wiring to. Caught on fire while I was driving. Story 53. I heard someone walking on my roof. It turned out to be a large rat with its tail stuck in the gutter, hanging on the side of the roof. Story 54. I was driving home from college in another state late in the evening. A truck drove past with fire in the wheel well and black smoke obstructing my vision. I saw it take the exit, and when I glanced back, It was completely ablaze. I called 911 to report the exit and model of the vehicle to get emergency services. Story 55. I was the manager at a movie theater. I went out to grab something from my car and noticed a dog locked in a van next to me. It was around 90 degrees, and the dog was clearly not doing well. I called emergency services and told them they had 5 minutes to get there before I would break a window. They arrived quickly and took the dog to the veterinarian. The negligent owners were inside the theater watching a movie with their dog locked in the van. I banned the entire family from the theater. I am not sure what the legal repercussions were, if any. Story 56. I watched two men assault a homeless man who wandered too close to their house. He never stepped onto their property or attacked them. The two men left him bloodied and beaten in the middle of the road. He eventually got up and started walking down the street again. I was on the phone with emergency services the entire time, but I am not sure what happened afterward. Story 57. I was really young and naive and called just because I was curious if they would pick up or not. I hung up immediately, and they showed up at my house. I foolishly expected a reward for that small mistake. Story 58. I discovered that pressing the power button on my phone repeatedly automatically calls the emergency services number. I thought my volume button was not working. It was not the correct button. Cue an awkward conversation where I explained to the operator that no, I was not trying to call emergency services. They were very understanding. I do not think I was the first person to discover this. Story 59. Someone was driving the wrong way on the interstate and almost drove head-on into me. I definitely saw my life flash before my eyes. Story 60. My mom had a seizure when I was about 19. It happened while she was driving us somewhere one morning. I stopped the car on the side of the road and called for an ambulance. Story 61. I was about 5 years old, and my brother was around 3. After watching Paw Patrol, we decided it would be a bright idea to call them, hang up, and pretend nothing happened. Instead, our father walked in, took over the phone, and the police came. My dad told me afterward that they were looking to arrest me. I started crying and locked myself in my room for the rest of the night because I was scared they would come to get me. It has been years, and it is still a joke in my family. Story 62. The car in front of me was cut off, causing the driver to swerve and roll their vehicle. Both passengers exited with minor injuries. I feel bad because the driver had just purchased the car, according to what he said. Story 63. My dad's ex-girlfriend, who I was very close with, overdosed because of him. She lived an hour away and said goodbye over text. That was the only time I have had to call emergency services. I have never driven so fast in my life to help someone before. Story 64. A homeless man overdosed in my lobby when I was the only person working. I did not fully understand what was happening, so I called the non-emergency police. It was only when they asked, "Do you think he needs an ambulance?" that I realized the seriousness of the situation. The ambulance arrived in 2 minutes, but he died. Story 65. I did not make the call, but I was part of the group that did. A friend thought it was fake, only for movies and television, so he was really surprised when the police showed up. Story 66. Neighbors decided to argue in the middle of the street one night. They were yelling and screaming at each other while one held a broom and the other a rake. The dispute was about who used the last of the medicine. There was no clear reason why they felt the street was the best place for the argument. Story 67. A drunk 16-year-old boy in his boxers stood at the bottom of our stairs, brandishing a kitchen knife toward my mother. He had gotten very intoxicated, broke into a liquor store, and was beginning to realize how much trouble he was in. He was my little sister's boyfriend at the time. Story 68. I lived in a student flat in a German university town near some right-wing fraternities. One night, they started playing and singing actual Nazi songs. The police operator asked me to hold the phone out of the window. He recognized Die Fahnen Hoch immediately. He said, "OJE," and the police arrived at their place about 10 minutes later, ending the party. It was not the last time we had to call the police on them. Story 69. On December 23rd, I was at home alone and started getting a high fever. For some reason, I called a nursing hotline I saw on television but don't remember what they told me. I ordered Domino's with a 2-liter of Pepsi and immediately got sick afterward. I finally gave up and went to bed. By this time, my fever was hovering around 104 degrees Fahrenheit despite taking acetaminophen, but it was not breaking. In my delusional state, I thought someone had broken into my house and was stealing the knobs off my stove. I decided to call emergency services, and an ambulance arrived. When they asked for my information, I couldn't tell them anything. Luckily, I had my wallet and purse with me and handed my wallet to the emergency medical technician so he could get my information. I had to stay overnight in the emergency room. My pulse was around 125 beats per minute when I was admitted, and they wouldn't let me leave until it returned to a normal level. Turned out I had mononucleosis and a bladder infection. Story 70. The man I was dating became violent and started beating me. I called for help, but he tackled me before I could speak. Fortunately, the dispatcher sent police officers to the address because she heard the screaming. Story 71. I had a regulatory requirement to verify emergency call capability after a phone system replacement. I looked up and called a non-emergency line to let them know I would be making a test call, then dialed emergency services. It is boring, I know, but I felt mischievous at the time. Story 72. A homeless man entered my workplace asking for change. When we refused, he started ranting about how he was going to stab a white lady in front of us, who were 3 white women. The women at the front were pushing the panic button, and I went to the back and called emergency services. The police never showed up. One of our male coworkers was able to talk him into going outside and locked the door behind him. It was a sketchy area in the city, and it was not the first time we had to handle a potentially dangerous situation. I quit the day my contract ended. Story 73. I was working at a fast food restaurant when a customer became very agitated in the lobby. He stomped past the front counter into the kitchen area and began handling various knives and slicers. I am 4 feet 11 inches tall and weigh 100 pounds, so I was not able to intervene other than calling emergency services. Fortunately, another customer went back, restrained the man, and removed him outside. Took over an hour for the police to arrive after I made the call. Story 74. First dog ever, a husky. Had to upgrade to a light outdoor chain because she pulled titanium wire lines apart. I don't keep her outside 24/7, just during the day for a few hours. It rained recently, and dirt caked in between the chain links, choking the chain. She can be very derpy and managed to choke the chain to about 2 feet of length with no slack, which restricted her neck and caused her to foam and act erratically. I broke a few trimmers trying to cut the thin chain because I didn't have proper wire cutters or big hedge clippers. I almost cut through, but it was getting worse, so I called for help and was able to untangle it from her. It was so tight that hair was stuck in it, but she wasn't cut or injured. Scared me for about half an hour, and since then, I've been more strict about chain use. She has a chain loop necklace that the light chain hooks onto. She's escaped a few harnesses and leashes, and she's always quiet when she's free or in trouble, so I have to be more watchful than I thought. She's like a smart toddler who can run faster than you and easily pull your own body weight. Story 75. Someone was aggressively banging on the door of my next-door neighbor's house. It sounded like they were trying to break the door down, and it went on for a while. It turned out to be the woman who lived there. Her teenage son had absent-mindedly locked the deadbolt while she was out to dinner. He was upstairs listening to music with headphones and did not hear her banging. Story 76. Oh, this is a good one. My husband hates blood. He was cutting potatoes on the mandolin. While it is a dangerous kitchen tool and definitely a cause for concern, he blacked out. Then he went into convulsions. The paramedics arrived, looked at the cut and said, "Sir, we can only offer you a bandage. I swear that will be going on his gravestone." Story 77. I was coming out of the restroom in a Dollar General as they were seconds into being robbed. This was around 4:30 in the afternoon. I made eye contact with the cashier, pulled out my phone, and went back into the restroom. They have a money safe that takes 10 minutes to open to access the deposit bag. I later learned that each cash drawer starts with $150 in $1 and $5 bills and coins. There is another $1,000 in the change fund to refill the tills with $1 and $5 bills and coin rolls. The thief made them wait while the cashier and manager lay face down in front of the registers. I gave my statement to the police and testified when the suspect went to trial a year later. He received 15 years for trying to steal $2,100 because pointing a gun at a person and ordering them to move constitutes abduction while committing aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, intimidation, and communicating a threat. Story 78. 15 years ago, I got a new phone and accidentally pocket dialed. When they called back, I ignored it. Just a heads up, don't do that. At 2 a.m., police were in our driveway. My then boyfriend, now husband, had no idea it was happening as he answered the door, and they were asking for me. They were very understanding about it. So embarrassing. Story 79. I witnessed a woman on the ground with a man standing by her, pointing his finger and yelling at her. Story 80. I was told to call to get a car towed, but then they realized that was a bad move. We explained that and never did it again. Story 81. My friend's husband came into the house and started hitting and choking her while we were on the phone. He was under the influence of cocaine and methamphetamine. Between breaths, she told me to call the police. I hung up and did so. Story 82. I was driving on the highway and saw a car swerving and driving erratically. It continued for a while, so I called the emergency number to report it. I do not know what happened afterward. Story 83. Only about 1.5 years ago, a neighbor had a habit of screaming death threats and racist profanities at everyone passing by the sidewalk. I am pretty sure he got jailed, evicted, or otherwise became someone else's problem. Edit. Actually, the first time was years before that. I spotted a definitely drunk driver on the road, so I called it in and reported the license plate, make, model, position, and direction. Story 84. My mom was drunk and had attacked my dad. He restrained her, so he had me call the police. I was 5 years old, young enough to struggle with the difference between a 6 and a 9. Story 85. I was 6 or 7 years old. I called emergency services and told them to come arrest my sister. She did not do anything. I just thought it would be funny. My parents were not happy. Story 86. I did not make the call myself but told my cousin that my mother was having a bad postpartum episode in which she was asking me to help her throw my twin brothers in the trash. I was in 3rd grade at the time. I watched them take her away in an ambulance, where she was taken to a mental health facility for a week. Story 87. A Greyhound bus collided side-on with a sedan at an intersection known for crashes 2 houses down from me. The driver of the car was dazed but slowly walked away from the scene before the police arrived. The passengers, none appearing older than 16, were left behind to explain what happened as they received medical care. I left after making the call and noticing others asking if they needed to hide any drugs for the passengers. Story 88. I drove by a fire on the side of the road. I did not know where I was because it was dark and we were in a rural area. This was before built-in global positioning system, and I was the passenger. I called it in and gave them the rough location when I saw the next street sign. Story 89. I was a kid, and my family visited relatives out of state in the summer. I suddenly wondered if dialing emergency services in this strange state would work. It does, and they made sure to call back and let my parents know it works. Story 90. I think I was 17 or 18. I was robbed at gunpoint by another girl my age, who I had begged my dad to let move in because she was homeless. I came home from school, we hung out, and I went to sleep for a bit because I had a headache. When I woke up, she had a gun under my chin, and there were 3 men stealing everything that wasn't bolted down in my house. We argued for a bit. She pulled the gun back, and I tried to wrestle it away. She ran out the door and shot at the house. I opened the window of my bedroom and dropped from a 2nd-story window into the driveway to chase after her. She had my school tablet and my sister's laptop that I was fixing. When I landed on my feet, there was an audible crunch. I took a few steps toward the car but couldn't move my left leg. I tried crawling to the car. They sped off. I crawled back up the porch steps, into the house, and into my bedroom and called emergency services. Police did not arrive. I called again. No police again. My dad came home. He called, but they didn't come again. They called back an hour later and asked what was stolen. I called them again maybe 2 years ago, and they also didn't arrive. Story 91. I was 4 years old when my mom taught me how to call emergency services and told me to only call if there was an emergency. I do not remember if it was the same day or the day after, but I decided to practice and see what would happen. The operator answered right away, which rarely happens nowadays. I hung up the phone, and less than 2 minutes later, they called back. I got in a lot of trouble, but at least I learned. Story 92. Frequently, I have to call various manufacturers spread across the country for work. One had an area code starting with 9 and 1. I was busy, multitasking, and just instinctively hit an additional one. As soon as the emergency dispatch answered, I hung up in a moment of panic. I received a swift callback from the emergency dispatch to my work number asking if anyone had called and if everything was all right. I said it was my fault and an accident, then hung up reactively. She said to make sure I stay on the line next time to explain to dispatch that it was a mistake instead of just hanging up, which makes sense. She canceled the call to whatever emergency response may have been on the way. I felt foolish. Story 93. Not me calling, but an experience I witnessed. My parents were watching a movie. Dad decided to go to bed and attempted to wake up my mom, but she wasn't responding. She had passed out on the sofa, so my dad called the ambulance. I was really little when it happened and remember following the ambulance, then waiting at the hospital. They don't know what happened or what caused her to pass out. She's completely fine now. Story 94. My sister and I were about 6 and 8 years old. We were playing with a payphone and dialed 911. We did not know it would work because we had not put any money in. A police officer came and we got in trouble. Story 95. I tried overdosing on ibuprofen and acetaminophen. I think I took 80 to 90 pills altogether. But once I started feeling the effects, I got scared and called emergency services. I could not stop vomiting and could not walk straight. Story 96. A man is talking to children over the fence at an elementary school. I have lived near the school for 20 years and have never seen anyone in that spot. The place where he was talking and parked is no reason to be there, ever, let alone talking to 6-year-olds over a fence. The spot is the farthest from the school aides and is behind a tree. Story 97. The neighbors in the apartment above me were arguing. I heard the woman screaming a lot, and I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I heard the police officer knock on the door and talk with them, but nobody was arrested, so I guess she was okay. Better safe than sorry. Story 98. A building fire I saw from the freeway. I told the emergency dispatcher the location and that it looked like an air conditioning device on the roof. The dispatcher thanked me because there were a couple of calls about that, but none as descriptive. Story 99. My older sibling chased me around the house, threatening to end my life. My family was very mentally unstable, and she had been violent with me on many occasions. She had learned this behavior from our parents, and I truly believed her threat. The police showed up, scolded me for wasting their time, and left. It was not the last time she would be violent with me. I cut ties with her and the whole family, and life has been much more peaceful since. Story 100. I was a child around 8 years old. My friends and I were playing football in the park when older children started throwing rocks at us. Story 101. My neighbors kept launching fireworks directly over our homes, even from their small rooftop perch, as if they were not responsible for launching them. Story 102. I was 6 years old. My mother was cheating on my father, and he was trying to get her phone to read her messages between her and a coworker. He tackled her to the ground, and they started punching each other. I hid under our computer desk with the landline and called emergency services. My father went to jail for domestic violence. Story 103. I was walking through the ravine near my childhood home when I was 14. I heard a woman scream for help and a lot of loud rustling. I called emergency services and then had the police dispatcher argue with me for 5 minutes about where I was in the ravine. as if I were standing there and knew which entrance I took to get into the ravine. Story 104. If I am remembering correctly, I believe it was a road rage issue. I was driving with my dog in the back to meet a dog sitter, and I merged into the left turn lane. Not aggressively, did not cut anyone off and signaled. I have no idea what happened. This person in a big van behind me started honking, flipping me off, gesturing, and driving closer to my car. He would not stop. Even when we turned, he was still doing it. So I tried to memorize his license plate and pulled over, and he continued to freak out at me as he drove past. Thankfully, he did not stop, and my dog and I were not hurt. I was just shaken. I called the police, gave them his plate, and never heard anything about it, but I hope that individual got pulled over. If he had hit my car on purpose with my dog in the back, I would have been extremely angry. The first time may have been before that, but I do not remember who called. My grandmother got food poisoning while visiting us and could not keep anything down. She did end up okay after a night in the hospital. Story 105. I was making breakfast one morning and heard a loud explosion that shook the house. It was my neighbor's oxygen tanks exploding in a house fire next door. She unfortunately did not survive. Story 106. I had a poor quality phone years ago that would freeze and automatically dial the emergency services when it froze. I frequently had to talk to emergency operators and assure them everything was fine and I did not need assistance. Story 107. Just last week, I called 999, which is the emergency number in the United Kingdom. A large group of African men has been moved into what used to be a women's shelter near me. We are separated by a large park, and the men have been hanging around the park drinking during the day because of the nice weather. A man was screaming for help from the park, and I called 999. The 23-year-old police officers would not go down there until backup arrived. It turned out the man was a father who confronted them because one of the men had been involved with his 12-year-old child. The father was beaten up by a group of them and could not walk due to a broken leg. Story 108. My baby was not breathing, and the ambulance and fire department had to come to our house. Her lips were turning blue. She had a terrible cold virus, and this happened in the middle of the night. It was very scary. Story 109. My wife has severe schizophrenia and recorded a half-hour video that started with, "If you are watching this, I am probably dead." That caused me to call emergency services and have her committed. Story 110. I was 6 years old and wasn't sure if emergency services worked from a payphone. I panicked when they answered and hung up. That is the story of how I caused my uncle's wedding reception to be swatted. Story 111. To report a semi-truck and trailer that caught fire on the overpass exit ramp. It was a small fire at first, but not close enough to reach the truck. By the time the fire department arrived, the entire truck and trailer were engulfed in flames. I could feel the heat intensely even from several hundred feet away. The cause of the fire and the condition of the driver remain unknown. Story 112. Welfare check today. The boss's partner called her and said he would not be around when she got home, then hung up and refused to answer when she called back. He is a raging alcoholic and has been threatening suicide on and off for years. The boss was a quivering wreck on the floor, and I thought, forget this. Story 113. Someone outside my apartment wouldn't turn off the bass in his grounded Volkswagen. I wasn't about to see if he was carrying a weapon, so I called emergency services and had the police handle the situation. The police found a gun and some drugs, and he was arrested. I hope his life was ruined. Honestly, if you think it is acceptable to sit in your car and play loud, unpleasant music so the entire neighborhood has to listen to it, then you deserve whatever consequences come your way, especially the negative ones. Story 114. I worked in a grocery store. One night, a lady went to the washroom, and it had been almost an hour since she went in. My coworker tried to knock and check on her. We then found out she had overdosed. I quickly called emergency services, and paramedics arrived. They told us we were quick enough to save her life because if we had not checked on her at that moment, she would have died. Story 115. I was a kid and hit the police button on our phone. For years afterward, every time I heard sirens near my neighborhood, I thought they were coming to punish me for abusing the system. The first real emergency was when I was at work and a customer clutched their head and fell over. Story 116. Next door apartment neighbors were beating each other up, mostly the man assaulting the woman. The police came and I let them into the building. The neighbors acted as if everything was fine and there was no problem. I think I called one more time when it happened again. I did not live there for long. Story 117. The house in front of us caught fire after their methamphetamine laboratory exploded. Thankfully, the fire did not spread, and everyone inside survived. Story 118. The only times I have internationally called 911, I was grounded, locked in a guest room as punishment for something, and there was a phone in the room. I just typed the number I knew because I was bored. The police needed to show up twice before they decided to unplug the phone. Story 119. A neighbor had a partially finished garage and chose to complete it himself. He seriously messed up the electrical wiring, so when he overloaded the circuit by plugging in an air conditioner, the circuit breaker did not trip. He lost a boat, recreational vehicle, car, garage, part of the house, and the dog in the resulting fire. Story 120. Sometime last year, I made my first emergency call. My neighbor was suffering from severe alcohol poisoning combined with, I assume, tetrahydrocannabinol in her vape pen. To make matters worse, her husband was beating her. She rang the doorbell and asked me to call her an ambulance. She was shaking all over and could barely stand. I called emergency services and gave her a bottle of water. I stayed with her on the porch until the ambulance arrived. I do not know what happened to her afterward. I hope she got help for her alcoholism and abuse. Story 121. In 2019, I got halfway through a probably fatal overdose and panicked. I do not remember much of that day. Also, I did not receive any support with my mental health afterward because the United Kingdom healthcare system is deeply broken. Story 122. I was having some beers with a coworker at the pizzeria after closing up shop. Around 2 a.m., we saw a man breaking into the store right across from ours. Story 123. Other than mistakenly calling it a kid, I told my husband to call about a month after my son came home from the neonatal intensive care unit while I performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation on my son. He was in respiratory arrest that led to cardiac arrest. Thankfully, cardiopulmonary resuscitation worked and my son is now a healthy 7, almost 8-year-old. Story 124. The only time I ever called, I watched an oncoming car drift off the road and strike a utility pole on the opposite side. They told me not to touch the wires on the car until a police officer arrived. The woman driving was the only person hurt. Story 125. A police officer had collapsed from a heart attack while driving his police car on the way home from a police funeral. He went over an embankment and crashed through a fence into the parking lot of a bike trail. We ran over to check on him, and I called emergency services. A doctor on his bike performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation until the emergency medical technicians arrived. Story 126. At the age of 14, I witnessed a serious accident. A car ran a red light and hit an elderly man. The car managed to escape. Fortunately, the man fell on the grass but was seriously injured. He was left with trauma, and I do not remember if he had fractures. Story 127. My boyfriend, who has epilepsy, had a seizure, fell, and hit his head on a door frame. We had been working on a school project until 4 or 5 in the morning. He was not feeling well, but I thought it was due to lack of sleep. Story 128. I was curious about what would happen. As soon as they answered, I hung up and went to the dinner table, acting like nothing had happened. 5 minutes later, they called back, and my parents were angry. The first time I actually had to call them was because my stepfather had passed out after I came home from school. He had heart issues and had brain surgery years prior, and I was the only one home besides him. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.